On the 1st of November 1869 at Westbury in northern Tasmania, John Regan married Emma Lynham. He was 45 years of age, said to be an inoffensive and industrious individual who worked on the railways near Westbury. Regan stood 5'6" and had curly sandy-coloured hair and was clean-shaven. Regan had fathered children with another woman with whom he had cohabited. This partner had since died. Regan had met Emma while he lodged at her mother, Margaret Lynham's, house. On his marriage registration, Regan said he was 35. His bride, Emma Lynham, was just 15 years of age. She put up her age to 16 on the marriage registration. Emma was one of 3 daughters of William and Margaret Lynham. Emma was a year younger than her sister Catherine and 3 years older than her younger sister Ellen, who was born on the 7th of October 1857. After their marriage, the couple resided with Margaret Lynham at Hagley. After the wedding, Regan claimed that he had been cajoled into marrying the girl by her mother, and that she had held his clothes to prevent him from leaving and moving to another lodging house. While married, mother and daughter robbed him every way, he said, while his wife complained that he spent too much money on his children. Another note of trouble between the pair occurred in February of 1870, when Emma received a ribald Valentine note. She and her husband had argued over the matter, and from that day forwards, rows and mutual recriminations had been frequent. The couple was said to argue over a man named Johnny Clancy, who may have been the author of the Valentine. On the 29th of March 1870, the Regans and Ellen Lynham boarded an old chaise cart and drove to Launceston for the day. They went to visit a relative of Regan's called John McDonough in York Street, where they had dinner. After dining, a half-gallon of ale was shared amongst a party of 9. Regan was not noted to have drunk an undue amount. During the afternoon, Regan purchased a mantle at a shop in Brisbane Street for his young wife, and in another shop he bought her a pair of earrings. Ellen accompanied her sister for the entire day, and said there was no argument between husband and wife. All who saw them in Launceston said that they appeared to be on affectionate terms. A friend of Regan's who saw him that day believed that there was something troubling the man, however. The trio left Launceston to return home at about 4 in the afternoon, with Regan driving the cart and the 2 girls sitting on side seats behind. They took the Westbury Road and stopped in Carrick at the Entally Inn, run by Mrs. Elizabeth Fogarty, for about a half hour, until about 7 p.m. Here Regan had 2 glasses of gin. He also bought his wife a glass of gin, and she then had 2 tumblerfuls of water. Ellen drank a ginger beer. During their stop there, according to newspaper accounts, some chaffing and larking went on between the girls and an unnamed young man. It was said that Regan took a dim view of this interaction. It was cold and dark by the time they continued their journey. A stub of candle had been obtained from the public house for the cart's lamp, and they set off again with Regan still driving. According to Ellen's version of events, a short distance on he told Ellen that she should take over the reins, that driving the horses would keep her warm. Ellen did as she was asked, and Regan went and sat beside his wife. Emma was singing, and he joined in with her. Nothing seemed amiss. Then, however, Regan stopped singing and spoke to Emma. He chastised her for squandering all his money on dresses and hats for her mother. Her reply was only 2 words: "What odds?" This sparked Regan into a sudden fury. "You bitch, I'll show you," he shouted, then stood up in the cart and struck Emma in the face with his fist. Taking hold of her throat with his left hand, his thumb on her throat, he took out a pocket knife from his coat pocket with his right hand, opening the blade with his teeth. On seeing the knife in her husband's hand, Emma asked, "Oh, Johnny, what are you going to do?" He replied, "You bitch, I'll kill you." At this point, Emma, who had dropped the reins and turned to face the couple, grabbed hold of the hand with the knife in it and implored him not to act. "Oh, Johnny, don't." His response to his sister-in-law was to say, "If you speak, I'll kill you too." Then, as he held his wife's head against the rail of the cart, he struck his wife with the blade in the side of the neck several times, and then, when it was behind her ear, he twisted the blade. Emma's head had been laying over the edge of the cart. Regan grabbed the dying girl and threw her down into the cart, her head coming to rest under the seat. Then he grabbed Ellen by the foot and back of her neck and threw her down from the cart. She landed on her back on the road. Seeing Regan clamber down after her, she got up and stumbled and fell down again before regaining her footing. Regan chased her around the cart, at one point grabbing two of the ribbons in her hat, but her hat came off and she evaded him. Still he came at her, chasing her as she dodged one way and then another, keeping the cart between them. Suddenly Regan stopped, looked around, took off his hat and ran into the surrounding bush. Upon seeing his flight, Ellen got back aboard the bloody cart. As she did so, she heard her sister moan twice. Urging the horses to go, she drove off to seek help. Ellen found a fire by the side of the road and asked if there was a man there. Receiving no response, she drove on to the Sillwood toll bar, about a half to 3/4 of a mile from where the incident had occurred, and here saw the light of a wagon. Again she asked if there was a man there, and the waggoner replied yes. "Come quickly, there is a murder done," Ellen said, and then asked if the toll-keeper, Mrs. Roberts, was there. Mrs. Roberts came out, and the cart was placed in the toll-gate yard until the police came. Mrs. Roberts took a lantern and checked on Emma, to discover her body saturated with blood in the cart. Thomas Roberts, her husband, also checked Emma for a heartbeat, but found none. This was just after 7 p.m. The police at Westbury were notified, and Superintendent Mahoney and 2 other officers arrived to take charge. Sub-Inspector Metcalfe had seen the group at Carrick earlier and searched Emma's clothes. In a pocket he found the earrings Regan had bought for her that afternoon. The body of Emma Regan was conveyed to Mrs. East's public house in Hagley, where an inquest was held. Meanwhile, a search was made for John Regan in the dark bush, which proved unsuccessful. Dr. Rocket examined the body on the 31st of March. At the inquest held that same day, he announced that he had found 2 deep wounds on the left side of her body, another on her face, 2 on the neck, one just above her collarbone, and another just above the breastbone, 3 inches deep, which had cut the femoral artery and penetrated the aorta. While Regan was evading the law, it came to light that he had a brother who had spent time in an asylum for the mentally ill in New Norfolk. Regan spent 9 days in the open, sleeping in the bush the first night, and on the first day making his way down to the River Esk. Most of the time he claimed he was in an area called Pitcher's Place. He also possibly wandered in a long gully at the back of Cataract Hill, near Prospect Village, where a man was said to have been glimpsed. On the 7th of April he appeared in Margaret Street, Launceston, between 8 and 9 p.m. He stopped a passer-by and desperately implored the man to go to the home of a Catholic priest, Father Walsh, and ask him to meet him. The man relayed the message, and the priest immediately set out to discover what it was all about. On the street he had a long talk with Regan, convincing him that escape was impossible and that he would be better off to surrender to the police. At length Father Walsh's entreaties prevailed, and he and the fugitive went to the police station, and at 9:15 surrendered to Inspector Sullivan. When told his surrender saved the government from paying out a £100 reward, he laughed and made a throwaway remark. He claimed that during the time he spent in the bush, he only ate 6 pears and had spoken only to 2 men who were seeking cattle which had strayed. Police doubted this story, as he was without any money when arrested, and was known to have had some on him at the time of the murder, and did not appear to have gone hungry. Regan was still dressed in the same clothes: light tweed trousers, a light vest, dark blue frock coat, and a black billycock hat. Taken back through the area, Regan was talkative, and between Hapston and Traveller's Rest, he pointed out where he took to the bush and explained to Superintendent Coulter, who was escorting him, that the act was not premeditated. He had given the reins to Ellen because he wanted to light his pipe, and that he had opened his knife to use it to stuff the pipe with tobacco. While doing so, the argument flared up, and he had struck at his wife without thinking. He claimed his hat fell to the ground, and he jumped down to retrieve it. While there, he heard somebody coming and ran off into the bush. He averred that had he been chasing Ellen around the cart, that he would have been able to. On the 7th of June, Regan was placed on trial for murder, pleading not guilty. Coulter repeated the story which Regan had told him while being transported from Launceston to Westbury. Regan had not mentioned Johnny Clancy, but somebody else in Westbury had mentioned the name to him, Coulter added. Regan's lawyer, Mr. Rocher, said in defence of his client that the argument on the cart had been over Johnny Clancy. Clancy, he claimed, was in the habit of visiting Emma when Regan was not at home. One day Regan had caught his wife and Clancy together in a dark room, their purpose for being there together obvious. The argument had begun over Emma spending too much of Regan's money on her mother, but he claimed more was said by Emma than what Ellen had reported. After she replied, "What odds?" she added, "You are always saying that, or showing your jealousy against me." When she mentioned jealousy, Regan had thought of Clancy and struck out at his wife in pure rage, in his frenzy stabbing her before he could stop himself. Rocher claimed that it was therefore not murder, because there was a lack of malice aforethought. The judge, Sir Francis Smith, replied, however, "Surely you don't expect me to say so, Mr. Rocher." Instead, the judge stated that the only provocation which could lessen a charge from murder to manslaughter would be if a husband was to find his wife with another man and the crime committed at that time. Otherwise, the crime was murder, and any provocation could only be used to lessen the punishment. The jury expressed a wish for Ellen to be returned to the witness stand and questioned about how long after leaving Carrick did the quarrel take place. The judge refused their request, saying it was of no importance. The jury retired for an hour and returned with a verdict of guilty. Regan rubbed his chin and upper lip and leaned back in his chair. When taken down the stairs from the dock, he paused and said in a broken voice, "Tell Mr. and Mrs. Pryor to take care of my poor boy." Regan was sentenced on the 10th of June. When asked if he had anything to say before sentence was passed, he hesitated a minute or two. Then, in a tone almost inaudible, he said they had been robbing him, he lost his temper, he had not meant to kill his wife, and that he was very sorry to have done so. The judge replied that the law left no alternative, and that his crime had been so barbarous that he should not hold out hope for mercy, but that as a Christian man should attend to the consolation and advice of the clergyman who would attend to him. Then he sentenced John Regan to death in a hushed courtroom. The prisoner was led away. It was 3 p.m. 18 days later, at 6 a.m. on the 28th of June, 1870, a gloomy, drizzling morning at Launceston Jail, Father Walsh joined John Regan in the condemned cell. Walsh had spent many hours in attendance with Regan, who was penitent as he awaited execution. At 8 a.m. the acting sheriff demanded the body of John Regan. The executioner entered the cell and pinioned the condemned man, who was dressed in a white shirt, white vest, and white trousers. He wore boots that were unlaced. The party entered the courtyard of the jail where the scaffold was erected. 4 javelin men armed with halberds waited at the entrance to the yard and led the procession to the scaffold. Father Walsh prayed earnestly as he walked with the prisoner, Regan repeating the words in a subdued tone. At the foot of the ladder, Regan kicked off his boots and walked steadily up the steps, still repeating the prayers, even as the white hood was drawn over his face. The rope was placed around his neck, and the last prayer for forgiveness and final amen uttered. The bolt was drawn and Regan fell. He struggled at the end of the rope for 12 minutes. His coffin had been forwarded by his relatives before death. On the plate it bore the simple inscription, "John Regan, died 28th of June 1870, aged 46 years. His body left the jail at 3 p.m, and a crowd of men, women and children who had gathered to see the funeral cortege realised they were waiting in the wrong spot, the hearse leaving by a gate into Bathurst Street. Once it was known, the crowd raced helter-skelter after the hearse to sightsee. At the Roman Catholic cemetery, John Regan was buried beside the body of his daughter, who had died as a young girl.